here? Okay. All right. Here we go. Here we go.
Hi. Yeah, you got it. Perfect.
So, you see yourself okay? Oh, God. Yes, you are. That's great.
Can you see us?
We'll do a testing. 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
We're testing 1, 2, 3.
testing 1, 2, 3.
Can you guys hear?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Who's busy with the thing? Come here and come there.
Hello, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Collective Escape, Trans World Making Against Catastrophic Violence. I am Elise, I also go by L. Ambrose. I am Assistant Professor of Black Study and the Study of Religion here at UCR, and
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Also, my name is Ivan Aguirre. I am an assistant professor in the Hispanic Studies Department, and I'm really excited to welcome y'all here today also. I would like to open this event also by inviting us to take a few collective breaths together. I find breathing together is a nice way of settling into the space, particularly for our virtual audience. Hi, everyone, wherever you are in the virtual world. Yeah, I would like to invite us to do a couple of breaths, 4, 7, 8 breath with me, which means inhaling for a count of 4, holding the breath for a count of 7, and then exhaling for a count of 8. I'll do the counting. You don't need to do the counting at all. It's okay. But that's kind of what I'm inviting you to do. So right now, if you want to like close your eyes or lower your gaze, soften your gaze for a minute, we'll do like 3 or 4 breaths. Bring your attention to your feet, to the soles of your feet, the sensations there. Bring your attention to your belly, and your hip area, your sensations there. Bring your attention to your chest, your heart, your lungs, your sensations there. Bring your attention to the palms of your hands, your sensations, anything feeling there. Bring your attention to the top of your head, and then we exhale together. And we inhale. And hold the breath. And we exhale.
Inhale.
Can't hear me. Oh.
We inhale. Hold it.
This one will.
And exhale. And we inhale. And hold it. And we exhale. Last one. We inhale. And hold it for a minute. Exhale together deep. Good. Thank you for breathing with me.
Thank you. We would also like to take this time to acknowledge this land, this space that we are on in the spirit of Indigenous scholars Rupert and Jeanette Costo's founding relationship to our campus. We would like to take the time to open this event to respectfully acknowledge and recognize our collective responsibilities to the original and current caretakers of these unceded territories, water. Payom Kawichum, the Serrano, Taktum, the Cupeño, and the Kumeye peoples, and all of their ancestors and descendants, past, present, and future. Today, this virtual and physical meeting space is home to many Indigenous peoples from all over the world, including UCR faculty, students, and staff, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on these homelands. I would also like to acknowledge the labor of those workers who built the technology we use to connect and maintain the infrastructure that allows our gathering today. May the experiences we share in this space become a way to honor and work towards mending the broken histories of our many nations. And thank you, Yvonne, for those words. I would also, again, and as a means of inviting, take the time to appreciate, express gratitude to the organizers of this event, Crystal Peck, and the co-sponsors, which are the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies, Decolonizing Humanism, it's like a question mark, so Decolonizing Humanism Initiative, Performing Difference in Queer and Trans Studies Working Groups, as well as the Faculty Commons, the UCR Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Now, to introduce this book roundtable discussion event, we are pleased to have today organizers and writers Miss Major, Toshio Meronek, and Eric A. Stanley in conversation around their new books, Miss Major Speaks, which is with Verso Press 2023, and Atmospheres of Violence, Structuring Antagonism and the Trans Queer Ungovernable with Duke University Press 2021, which theorize the unending catastrophe of racialized anti-trans terror in both its new and old forms. Beyond diagnosis, we are all invited to participate by dreaming of some plans for our collective escape. And after the nourishment that will come from this roundtable, we are all invited to a meet and greet afterwards in INTS 111. I think that's called the Round Room, and we'll be there through 1:30. There'll be light food and drinks, and all are welcome to join us there. Yvonne will now introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Al. So as a little bit of an introduction first, Miss Major is a Black transgender activist who has fought for over 50 years for her trans and gender norm-conforming communities. She is a veteran of the infamous Stonewall riots, a former sex worker and a survivor of the Dannemora Prison and Bellevue Hospital's Queen Tank. I got really bright. Her global legacy of activism is rooted in her own experiences, and she continues her work to uplift transgender women of color, particularly those who have survived incarceration and police brutality. Her recent creative projects include executive producing the series Trans in Troubleland, now streaming everywhere, and Miss Major Speaks, a book on her life activism co-authored with Tosh, who's joining us here today, host of the podcast San Francisco. Eric A. Stanley is Associate Professor of Women and Gender Studies at the University of California, Berkeley, and co-editor of Trapdoor, Transcultural Production and the Politics of Visibility, and Captive Genders, Trans Embodiment, and the Prison Industrial Complex. They hold a Haas Distinguished Chair in LGBT Equity and are the author of Atmospheres of Violence, Structuring Antagonism, and the Trans Queer Ungovernable, which looks at the dangers of inclusion for trans and queer people as opposed to liberation, calling for an abolitionist theory of world building. And Toshio Meronek is a San Francisco-based writer who has reported for Al Jazeera, The Nation, and Vice. Their writing focuses on housing and queer politics in the Bay Area, where they produce the podcast Sad Francisco. Oh, I said that wrong earlier. Sad Francisco. Their work also appears in several anthologies, including Trapdoor, Transcultural Production, and the Politics of Visibility. And their new book, Miss Major Speaks, co-authored with Miss Major, is a landmark biography of legendary Black trans revolutionary and Stonewall veteran. So we are very excited to have y'all here, and we're very excited to listen to you. And I hand it over.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know it's the end of the year, so extra thanks for coming out. And yeah, thank you to Crystal and Catherine and Elle and Yvonne for that intro. Should we maybe read a little
Yeah.
bit from our respective books?
Have Major speak and then I'll read some.
Yeah, maybe I'll read from the introduction, and then Major can speak to living what I'm about to read. So the introduction is called Still Fucking Here, which is something that Major has said previously, and the end of the documentary that was made in 2014 about Major and her community. The documentary ends with that refrain. So for more than 50 years, Miss Major has played the crucial role of surrogate mother and grandmother to countless trans and queer people around the world. The price of getting to this point has been high. The lives of 2 of the 3 people she's called the loves of my life, 5 totaled pre-1977 Cadillacs, 2 homes destroyed by fire, both of her original kidneys, an eye, a toe, and all but 1 tooth. She called it Snaggle, that stuck to her gums so low for years before she drove to Dallas, Texas on her 70th birthday and treated herself to a new set. Major has surpassed the expectations of those she calls the powers that be, the corporate, government, and nonprofit actors who work to preserve the status quo, and the forces in the world who want us all to fit into our proper places in an established social hierarchy from which they can look down on us and make sure we don't fuck with the money and privilege they hoard. And to get under their skin even more, she has a good time, modeling a tremendously joyful resistance that has inspired thousands of people to do the same, including me and so many of the people I love. To us, Major is a hope-giving anomaly who wipes away cynicism and helps us believe that better worlds are at once possible and worth fighting for. Major's driver's license lists her date of birth as October 25th, 1946. Her parents raised her and her 2 siblings, Cookie and Sargent, off the salaries of a United States Postal Service administrator and a beauty shop owner during the few years when a Black middle class began to grow in cities like Chicago. There, she graduated high school at 16, and her family paid to send her to college in Minnesota, where she knew she'd find the corn-fed white boys she was into at the time. In the dorms, she was placed with a roommate who couldn't keep a secret, and after he discovered her suitcase of femme clothing, she left school before the first term was over. So I will stop there. That's just a little intro from the beginning of the book. Sure.
Yay.
How you doing, Major?
How's it going out there in Little Rock?
So far, so good. I can't complain.
Cool. So Major and I met about, a little over 10 years ago. And I was doing journalism at the time. I was interviewing her for the documentary about her life. And so I'm really excited that now I get to be kind of a documentarian in my own way with this book that just came out this week. So very excited that y'all are here to celebrate the book and celebrate Major's really extraordinary life and the role that she plays in so many people's lives as a mother figure and as an activist. And she's still doing it out from Little Rock. But I'll let...
do you want to ask her a question?
Sure. Major, it's the first week of the book coming out. Are there any kind of interesting, unusual responses that you've gotten so far?
No, a couple of queries into, well, can you come here? And no, I'm not going nowhere. So that's out. So other than that, no, it's exciting, but I take it in my pace, easy, breezy, cool. And how's Eric doing?
I'm okay. How you can hear me, Major?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're
okay.
fine.
I'm doing good. You hanging out in Little Rock?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
As I'm supposed to.
You know. Yeah. So, I was able to read the book in an earlier draft, and it has so many amazing things in it. And the movie came out what 5, 6, how many years ago?
14.
Wow. Okay, a long time ago. Time. I'm like, it was last year, and then it was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we had that, and now we have, in a certain sense, a whole new generation of people, readers, writers, thinkers thinking with you. And so, how does it feel? Like, what does it feel like to be alive, to be able to witness this, right? So many people like have books written about them or with them after they've passed on, but you're still fucking here. So are you feeling the love? Yes, you are. Are you feeling all the love?
Yes, I am.
Good.
Yes, I am. I
Good.
just had the Pauline come visit me. So far, so good.
Good.
It's a little bit unexpected, but it's still good.
Yeah.
It feels good.
Good.
And thanks to Toshio, it's going to get better.
That's right.
I was asking her for, 5 years, the first 5 years anywhere, if she would be down to write a book. And finally, she said yes. So that was a huge gift for me.
I'm going to read a little bit from my book, but first, Major, we've talked about this a lot before, and I think you've had some really, of course, amazing insights, right, in our kind of contemporary moment where we see the like ongoing attacks against trans people, but the kind of intensification of it. So, if you have some words of wisdom for all of us for how we should respond.
Well, what I feel we have to respond is, let's be prepared to fight. They're not going to stop until those people stop them. The reason for this is beyond me. They first went after the kids to stop them from joining in sports and having a good time. And as soon as they get through that, they're going to come after us. Mm-hmm. And as far as I know, none of us are going anywhere. So we have to be prepared to get dirty a little bit and fight.
Yes, that's right. Fight. I mean, you've been doing it a long time, and like Toshio was saying, I met you a very long time ago, which you probably don't remember because it was at TARC. But you're one of those figures that allow for so many of us to envision a future, and that's so important because you're living it. And you're not just existing, but you're living and you're loving and you're having a good time, and you show us all how to have a good time, and so that's so important, right? And so I think part of that fighting back is actually like enjoying yourself and doing your thing, and so I really appreciate all of that from you.
Thank you so much, honey.
Yes, honey. So I'm gonna read like just 2 pages from my book, and then we'll kind of continue this conversation. And this will bring in some stuff that you might have some stuff to say about, Major, too. So I'm going to read just a little bit from the chapter called Necrocapital, Blood's General Strike. And what made me write this chapter is that this was a long time ago. I was getting my blood drawn at like the free clinic, and I was really interested in like where it actually went. And of course it went to like testing facilities and all those things. But, you know, I was interested in like all the different travels that it took and where it would eventually end up. And what was interesting to me about that is every person I asked, like from the nurse practitioner to UCSF to the NIH to the CDC, nobody could actually like kind of guide me along the path of that blood's travel. And so I ended up writing a chapter about death and capital and HIV. And so I'm going to read just the end, which is, yeah. So on October 11th, 1992, ACT UP, which stands for AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, vowed to bring AIDS home, as they staged a political funeral whose target was the unending silence spoken as an action of the U.S. government and specifically George H.W. Bush's administration. The direct action was organized during and an accompanied contestation to an exhibition of the Names Project AIDS Memorial quilt in Washington, D.C. Members of ACT UP felt the quilt gave cover to a racist, ableist, and homophobic culture that might have more emotional attachment to the quilt as object than to the struggle to make it stop growing. While powerful to witness, the quilt for many AIDS activists sentimentalized the genocide in the warm familiarity of tactile comfort, and in turn deflated rage through the privatization of collective harm. Further, those who helped plan the action believed that the quilt aestheticized the pandemic for the pleasure of straight life, in effect making cozy the gory devastation of mass death. Quote, "Bring the dead to your door, we won't take it anymore." The chant beat matched the thundering drums of the marchers, rhythmically driving the otherwise somber procession. Toward the front, a row of mourners formed, armed with metal urns and wooden boxes raised in defiant irreverence, accompanied by thousands more behind them. Slowly, they streamed from the steps of the Capitol building, forming a river of sorrow that collected its edges in a swell of anguish. As they reached the White House fence, those carrying ashes diverged from the crowd in organized hope of arriving before the DC police flanking them on horseback. Screams broke the quiet choreography as protesters rushed the fence while others formed a human barricade. A living wall of loss, intent on protecting the pallbearers from the swinging clubs of the mounted cops. Vessels were hurriedly uncapped, and plastic bags of ground bone were ripped open in a frantic gesture to complete the task before the still advancing police. The powdery gray remains of looted people, the ephemera of lifetime's end, took flight in a gust of wind that scattered them onto the green of the lawn. Arms stretched long between bars emptying vials of compressed life, the cathartic shattering of losses rehearsal. Once emptied, containers were launched over the iron gates and collected on the grass. The ritual ended with riotous mourners pressed against the bars, some covered in ash, creating a pile of the still living. Entangled together, they wailed with miserable rage to announce the devastation and the arrival of their dead. The incalculability of this violence, its magnitude and ruthlessness, demand a response that can confront such intensity so that life might extend beyond endless confrontation. Yet, if we believe that entering into contractual relationality with those organizing the profits produced by HIV cell lines will offer us little more than exploitation's continuance, then what is to be done? From the scorched plantations of Haiti to the scattered ashes of ACT UP, the burn recalls the will of collective revolt. Even if the Ashes action was not able to inaugurate an anti-necro-capitalist present, it continues to stand as testament to forms of disruption that might guide us beyond the misery of our living end. As a protester who spread her father's ashes put it, quote, "We have to keep doing this so that there are not more boxes of ashes." The laboring commodity, the deadly formation that sedimented its presence in the New World as the enslavement of Black people both relied upon and forcibly redistributed the bio-ontologization of race and sexuality. A circle of interminable death and value. An inheritor of this continuous past, blood captures, as an object of transference, the fantasies and phobias of a world built on racial capitalism's and corporative technologies. It is not that each iteration of blood's meaning is identical, but together they congeal a partial view where an action and assault meet in the bathroom stalls of Pulse, on the lawn of the White House, in the storage reagent banks, and in the scene of AIDS. Reading blood as racial supplement and sexual signifier tells an otherwise absent story of valuation, a heretical analysis that knows communal life mandates nothing short of capitalism's demise. It also forges, as Keela Beja theorizes, a positivity that can only be understood by blood, the deproletarianization of the blood. Or put another way, perhaps capital is dead labor, but dead labor can still strike. So Major, I know that you worked at TARC for a long time and that you've been involved in a lot of different, HIV/AIDS service organizations. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the ways that HIV and AIDS has impacted your life and some of the work you've done around it.
It impacted my life terribly because a lot of friends that we knew them one day, and before the week was out, you didn't know them. People were dying left and right. It was pretty sad for the government to let this go on as long as it did. When they put this on gay people and stuff, that really incensed me a lot. And it's been hard, even now still, because it hasn't gone anywhere. It's lying dormant. It can be brought up again. It's very sad. Very sad.
One of the things that you did, Major, at the beginning of the crisis was you started Angels of Care.
What's your show?
Oh, I was just going to ask you if you could talk a little bit about Angels of Care, which is an organization that you started back in New York when she was living there. Oh, sorry. My bad. Hey, Major.
We got
I
my
was
problem.
gonna say, wait a minute.
All right. Yeah, all these people can hear my question for the third time now. Back at the beginning of the HIV crisis, because as you mentioned, it is not over yet, you started Angels of Care, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what that all was.
Well, that was, I thought that they said you couldn't touch another person, that they didn't know how it was transmitted. And the few girls and I got together and we went to the houses and took care of them, and washed them, and did the dishes, because at that time, the families couldn't do it. They hands off kind of, they had in belief. And we bridged that gap, so that when we did find out how it was transmitted and how you got it and stuff, and then the families started to come along. But by that time I was fed up and angry, and so I closed it down, stopped doing it, and did something else.
Yeah. But for those people that you all helped, that was obviously life-changing. As the family,
It was.
yeah.
It was amazing because the one that we took care of was a skinny, frail one. And the pictures that they had of themselves when they were young and vibrant and alive. Such a contrast.
I think. This one? Can you hear me with this one? No.
Here.
Yeah. We're it's like karaoke up here. So, Major, I'm not sure if you heard about this or not, but I'm going to tell this story because it's important for everyone here to know as well.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, a 24-year-old black trans man in San Francisco named Banco Brown was assassinated by the protocop, which is to say the security guard at the Walgreens on like 4th and Market. And they said that he had shoplifted $14 worth of food. There's a really horrific video, which I do not suggest people watch, but I accidentally watched it. And the security guard, which is to say the police officer, chased him outside, and he was outside when he got shot, when the guy shot him, murdered him. We've been seeing this, after the 2020 uprisings, we've been seeing the intensification, especially in the Bay Area and San Francisco, but everywhere, of a kind of return to, we need, more police officers to keep black and trans people safe. We need to increase the war on drugs. We need to increase street sweeps. We need to decrease affordable housing, right? So it's kind of a, what we might call a counter-revolution, where people are pushing back on all the things that already cause so much damage and harm in our lives, right? But we're seeing it grow a lot. And so, you've done so much work popularizing the idea and the necessity of prison abolition, right? Because we know that all these things are harmful, and we actually also know what our communities want and need to keep us and our communities, healthy and living and all of those things. And so, what do you think about this contemporary moment where, again, people are like calling for more and more cops, while they are still, of course, brutalizing and killing specifically black trans people?
They don't need more cops. They need to get some common sense. They need to stop this shit whereby we're wrong and they're right. They don't have any idea of what it's like to live in a skin that we have. They should have some sense of reality here. They should realize that, everybody, they shot this man over getting the food. My God, what did this come to?
Yeah.
They're coming at us every turn of the gate. They come at us.
Yeah.
They have to do something different. Because the old way is not working. That's obvious. And we have to think about stuff. We have to get rid of prisons. We have to stop this mass incarceration bullshit. We have to stop it.
Yeah.
What to say to do it is vote. And see what that does. And if that doesn't work, we have to think about what next.
That's right. Toshi, I wanted to ask you a question about what... Is this thing working? Oh, it is working. Okay. Sometimes I can hear myself, sometimes I can't. Toshi, I wanted to ask you a question about the process of writing this book with Major, because you've worked with her for a long time, you've been her friend, you've traveled a lot with her, so I could see it being, a lot to navigate, right? And so you also have this closeness with her, where obviously she trusted you enough to do this project with you. So what was it like, and do you have? So that's the first part. Then the second part is, do you have a favorite story from the book? There's lots of really amazing stories. Major is a storyteller.
Yeah, she's a much better storyteller than myself, which is why most of the book exists as a conversation between the two of us, whereby I'm mostly prompting her, and then she's telling the stories. When we looked at doing a book, I knew that Major didn't want a typical biography, because there had to be more than that individual story for her to want to be part of the project. So instead, we decided to use some of Major's stories to give people who are compelled to be activists, but maybe feel overwhelmed by life or by the movement work that they're doing. Maybe they're feeling burned out. So the book is an attempt to sort of like give people some guidelines, give people some ways of kind of being gentle on themselves to continue doing the movement work that they're doing. And the book itself is a collection of about 5 years of recordings that I made. Basically, like traveling with Major, we went all over the U.S. We went over to Europe at one point. So I got to see the world, care of Major, and meanwhile I was, holding my recording device out at every chance that I got, and I tried to distill down like some of the wisdom that I got over those 5 years into the book. Let's see, a story that, one of the stories that I did not know previously before embarking on the book project was Major at one point was kind of like in a Bonnie and Clyde situation up in New York State. This is prior to
Just giggling away over there.
And as I tell these stories, I know that half the time
Statute of limitations.
Major wants to correct me, but New York State, just before heading to getting locked up out in Dannemora, she was on the road, and she tells the story much better than I do in the book, but she was traveling, going town to town with, she got in with a guy that sounded like he was not a good influence on her, and she ended up in like a kind of a fiery car crash, after which point she was arrested, but I hadn't heard anything about the guy's name was Tex, and she never heard from Tex again, but it makes for a pretty good story that ended up in the book.
Wow. Is that all true, Major?
Oh, true.
I know.
He was fine. Shit, what can I say?
You got to do what you got to do.
Yes, you do.
Yes. So there's so many amazing stories. I mean, they just keep going on and on and on. I think that, so definitely get the book. It's now available. Get it from your local bookstore or wherever. And I wonder if we should open it up for questions. If people have questions. So people can
Sure.
chat
Or
with Major.
maybe I had like one question for you.
Oh, okay.
You're like, here it comes. So your book, it's written so beautifully. I can only aspire to write something so every word is has been selected very purposefully, and despite the topics that you discuss, being so potentially really depressing, I feel like you wrest out of the subjects a way of kind of looking at how we can organize around these really dismal topics. One of the questions that I had for you, sorry, I'm just reading the questions that I...
Online shopping.
So, on that topic of like writing with care around the people and topics that are potentially really soul deflating, for a book that's published by an academic press on Duke University Press, Do you purposefully write to reach non-academic audiences as well?
No. So those of you who all know me, I know lots of you here. I used to work here, and UCR is one of my favorite places. Not the place, but the place meaning you people, as in not the administration. But you know, all of you people and the students in particular. I mean, the students here taught me so much. They taught me how to teach, and so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to work with the students here. But okay, so that had nothing to do with what I'm about to say. But I actually, you know, the way that I have like a general, so those of you all know me know that I have a generalized bad attitude. And so if somebody's like, you need to write in this specific way, or you need to think in this specific way, or you need to follow these kinds of constraints around the production of a book, then I just won't do it. And so for me, I actually think that books produce audiences. They don't really find them. And so I wanted to write in a way that felt most ethical to me when the very possibility of ethics had already been evacuated. And so what that meant was an attempt to stay with these like really awful scenes of violence, describe them when necessary, because I think both looking and looking away are simultaneously accumulatory processes, so we can't get out of the scene, is what I'm suggesting. And so for me, you know, writing with care, writing fairly slowly, trying to decide when enough description was necessary and when I actually just had to leave something alone, right? And then also holding on to the question throughout the entirety of the text that, you know, I couldn't answer what does it mean to do justice to those who were lost to the world. All I can do is continue to ask the questions in a whole bunch of different ways. And I was able to write this book, which took 15 years, a very long time to write, because of the organizing world that I'm lucky enough to be part of, which include Major, which include Toshio, which include lots and lots of people, right? I always say anything that I might have to offer that's at all useful is, you know, a kind of culmination of the worlds that I've been lucky to inhabit, right? So organizing also pushes me to not write really simple narratives, right? So many like academic texts, there'll be like, I always say there'll be like violent chapter, art, good. Or like organizing, good. It's like the escape route out of them. And right, that's not how the world works. Or we like line up all the like dominated people and somehow like we flip power around and then we have freedom. Like there's all these different mechanisms that people use. And those of us that organize know that that's actually not how the world works, right? And so, you know, I think in terms of voice and authorship or whatever that might mean, you know, I attempt to, again, just sit with the brutality of the archive while also always remembering the like radical generativity of trans and queer endurance, right? So I have at the end of the book, you know, I think a lot with this phrase that Tourmaline, who is a friend of Major and Toshio and mine, says, where she says, it's easy to be free, it's easy to be alive. And that's, in a certain sense, the hardest statement for me to think with, right? So the entire book is like the brutality of the world, and then I'm like stuck with the sentence, right? In its beauty, and its simplistic clarity, and its evocative tone, like all those things. You know, and so at the same time, while I'm describing violence, I'm also always trying to remember Tourmaline's words, and, you know, of course, knowing that these things are not self-evident, and, you know, that indeed another end of the world is possible, but it's only going to get there if we make it.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I was my ongoing joke is that all my students call me the bummer professor because they leave class and they're like, "What just happened to us?" And I'm like, but you know, then I remember, you know, so you know, that's my general disposition. But then the things that pull me out of it are, you know, Major telling stories. So yeah, but if there's questions from you all, or we want to make sure to have time. Oh yeah, that one works.
So what's important is every one of us is in that book.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, the book is, I mean, I guess both books are, it's about not just an individual, it's not just about Major, it's not just about Tourmaline or Eric or I, but it's really about creating movements that, you know, build better worlds.
Yes, and that it's a stained light. What's so important about both of those books is they sustain life. They keep you alive, going, believing in the future, trying to get there. That's what's important.
That's right.
Don't let this shit continue. End it.
She told us what to do. We just have to do it. We gonna listen or not?
There you go.
Super. Well, thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Tosh. Thank you, Miss Major. I don't know if I'm like in the square of the screen, I hope. We would like to open it up to questions. I want to also like stay for the chat. I mean, for the YouTube live chat or for the YouTube live stream. I'm looking at the live chat also. So if anyone has any questions, that is, any audience online, I can look at the chat and I can like share the question here with the group. I don't know if anyone here. I'm sorry. I don't know if anyone here has questions for
I don't know
our
about
guests.
budget, but that's a cool skirt you got on.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I feel like I'm spotlight. But yeah, like, I don't know if anyone has questions. I can open up with some questions.
Sure.
I can open a general question if while we to like roll it off. I heard the three of you say in different ways the importance of being gentle. Being gentle was one word, phrase that I heard. The importance of care and writing, and particularly thinking about. Now I'm looking at the screen, very spotlight. Particularly thinking about the importance of fighting and the importance of pushing back and the importance of like fighting. And I don't think we usually associate political struggle with gentleness or with softness or with care. I think that is one thing that is like changing in our generations as we make it more explicit. It's not something particularly new. The personal is the political is something that is super, like it's not something particularly new. And I think that our generation is looking at it in a very, in a more nuanced and in a more direct way. So my question was, based on y'all's experiences, based on y'all's lives, based on y'all's experiences, how can we be gentle with oneself? Do y'all have any tips and tricks or any things to share with us for caring for ourselves, for caring for myself, for caring for each other as we fight, as we resist, as we change?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. And for me, I mean, Major has been a huge inspiration for making the movement work, the organizing that I do, sustainable, because I think it's so easy to burn out. We all have so much going on, and add, a movement that you really care about and you want to see succeed on top of that. And it's so easy to get burned out. But one of the things that Major's modeled for me is, taking time out for self-care, because you're not going to be able to give to the movement that you care so deeply about if you yourself are not, mentally, physically, emotionally there to give it, and you're just kind of running on fumes, I guess.
Major, did you want to answer? How do you take care of yourself? How do you do it to keep going?
Easily, I take a day off, child. You have to remember that these people are going to make it whether you're there or not. They're going to decide whether you're there or not. So take some time for you. Then when you get this fill of your time, go back. And you go back stronger and ready to continue on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, whenever someone asks me the self, I'm like the worst person to ask that question to, because I think that what keeps me going is rage, revenge, friendship, and cake. Like those are like the things. Yeah, me and you both. Yeah, and so I mean, but I also think like what constitutes self-care or whatever that is really different. Like we always position as organizing as the thing that we need to take space from, but actually organizing is the thing that offers me respite, right? And so it's really interesting because we've so like produced this world where it's like that's another job, and if your organizing feels like another job, then you're in the wrong organizing
Right,
space.
that's true.
It's probably just a job, and that's fine. I mean, whatever. We all have these horrible jobs, but yeah. And so maybe you need to figure out something else, because I deeply feel like, of course it's gonna be tough. Of course there's gonna be conflict, all those things, but it shouldn't feel like the third shift. And
you shouldn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders.
yeah,
It don't help.
yeah, that's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I see more questions.
Yeah, thank you all. Such a great panel. This is sort of a continuation of Yvonne's great question, but having seen all of your work over the years and the kinds of different generations of organizing and community activism and such, and how they've changed over the years, I mean, I've seen, Eric and Toshio, for example, doing all kinds of organizing work in the Bay Area, from housing and the homeless population to policing. It's like your organizing work never stops. So for Eric's academic life, many of us see ourselves as academics, but I feel like for Eric, the academic job is just a form of income to sustain the organizing work and activism. And so what happens for all of you when you encounter frustrations in the organizing work and in the organizations and groups that you work with? How do you interact with them with the same level of care, knowing that you're committed to their goals but have real issues and conflicts with their approaches?
Oh yeah, that's such a good question around group conflict, which is especially in queer org. I mean, oh my God, drama. And I think that, and we'll go to Major after this. She can tell us all about it. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's really hard that we have to acknowledge that the world doesn't want us individually and us collectively to exist, and so we're going to have every kind of every form of that power is going to be pushing back on the very possibility of us continuing to do that work, right? So we're going to be outmoneyed, outpeopled, all those things, and we're just some people that sometimes can steal some copies at my work. That's literally all we have. But I actually think the groups that I work with have been around for 20 some years with no money, and we always say we're together for 20 years because we have no money, right? That's precisely why, and not in a theoretical, not in a whatever, in a material sense. That's why we're still together, right? And we meet every Saturday and have met every Saturday, and we show up together, nobody making us, it's not our job, we have no money to steal, you just don't have to deal with those things. And it's really interesting because what it does is create a really different form of sociality that's probably unlike any other space that I exist in my daily life, because it's not coercive in the same kind of way, right? And I think that's a really interesting experiment, and it's hard because we don't even have the skills of necessarily of how to show up in those spaces, because everything in our world is so coercive. And of course conflict happens, and you try to work it out, and you're trying to, you always try to remember that, hopefully we can repair if whatever's happened is not so major, that we can keep going on, because the work is really important. And again, also because, the work is the work of building friendships and communities and lives together. And that's really important to it, but it's not easy, and all kinds of, as all kinds of things happen. But hopefully people can come back together and figure out how to go on. I mean, I just finished teaching this class called Queer Study, Queer Struggle, and it was a studio-based class on how to organize, because I realized that so many of my students had an amazing analysis, really sharp critique, but they did not know what to do they didn't as in the next thing to do. And so it was an interesting experiment on what if, we have all these other forms of studio class, dance studios, all these things, why do we not have organizing studios? Why is that not part of how we think about what we're doing here. And it was a really great experience, and it was like really interesting. And so many of them reflected, precisely this, like, I don't know, stuckness around just not knowing what to do, because they didn't know that building those communities outside of whatever club they were in or whatever was even possible. Like, they didn't know you can put up a flyer on a billboard and maybe someone will show up. Probably not, but then you'll put it up again, and then maybe you'll get one person, then maybe you'll have two people, right? And so it felt really inspiring to, like, think intergenerationally around that question, right? What does it mean to foster those communities that, in a certain sense, historically were more readily available? Like, they've actually gotten much more scarce now. So it's a really great question. But Major, how do you deal with, how have you dealt with conflict in the groups that you've been involved in?
Well, the thing is that you have to realize you don't have a lot of people you don't like on this earth, and a lot of people that you do like. You give everybody the space they need to be themselves and go from there.
Yeah.
You don't have to take your feelings out on everybody,
Yeah.
So you deal with each person individually, and it leaves you time to deal with you too.
Mm. That's right. Do you have anything you want to add, Tess? No. Okay, cool. Thanks, Marion.
Oh, come, fellas.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience or online?
Question in the back.
I guess in the same strain, of course, it's kind of difficult to know what will happen in the future because, well, unpredictability, but like, what do you all imagine organizing spaces to look like, especially with today's youth?
Do you have,
Would you repeat that?
Sure, I can maybe it's easier. I'll try to repeat it in here because I think that maybe she can hear it better. So the question was around what do you imagine, right? Of course, we can't predict the future, but what do you imagine organizing spaces might look like in the future, especially with like young people or youth? Like, what do you think might happen? Of course, we don't know, but what are some guesses you have, Major?
Well, the thing is, if it goes like planned, we'll live in a world that is open, free from judgment, and alive. People will care about one another. What happens to them? What happens to you? Where you go? How you get there? And they won't concern themselves about your personal life and what goes on in the bedroom. But that's what it is. They want to know who's fucking who isn't fucking who. That's bullshit. Put that aside and just live.
Yeah, I love that. I love that vision of the world. I mean, I think a lot about this, and I think especially in queer organized, like the group that I work with is super intergenerational, meaning there's people in their early 20s and people in their early 70s. And that's so important to me, and I think that oftentimes, especially in queer organizing, it's not intergenerational at all, and that's a loss on every side of that. And so I think that that's really important, that older people don't get thrown away and younger people don't get thrown away, and we have so much to learn from each other. And I actually think that organizing is going to have to intensely escalate if we're going to have a world to survive in. And I mean that in like every material sense. And I believe that in all of my molecules, that the dystopian of the future is already here and has been here for almost 500 years, and its intensification is so overwhelming. I mean, I live in San Francisco. We both live in San Francisco, which is, I think has the third most billionaires in the world, has almost 100,000 empty units and 10,000 people sleeping in tents, right? And then we have ruling class people walking down the street, bear macing people in their tents, and then zipping them back up, right? That's the kind of brutality. So then the question is, what kind of organizing is necessary to not simply confront that, but end the world where that can exist?
Awesome, thank you. We have a question online that says, from Steph Toralba that says, "Thank you for all your beautiful conversation. Since Eric Stanley mentioned teaching, how do y'all translate your organizing work into teaching and sharing knowledge with others? And this includes the teaching and the learning that happens outside of neoliberal institutions."
Do you want to start? You could talk about your podcast.
Sure.
Plug.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the organizing that we do, it obviously can come in so many forms. Eric just mentioned teaching a sort of lab that is organizing based, and I know that people were making different types of media. That's where my experience has been for the most part, having been in journalism for 20 years or so. People were making zines in Eric's class, which was cool, bringing back the 1990s.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the work that I've done has been in writing, but more recently I'm trying this podcast thing. It's very DIY, but it's, yeah, I mean, the fact that we are up against so many different forces, it means that we have to come back and strategize, like, how many different ways can we push back against those forces, and it's going to take all different forms. And I'm trying the podcast thing. I don't know, it's been like a year or so. We'll see how it goes.
Hey, everyone should check it out. It's SAD, like SAD, Francisco. It's a little hard to, yeah, when you say it, sometimes it sounds like San Francisco. But yeah, check it out. It's really great. And I think that what it does, right, there's so much media around the Bay Area right now, like attempting to produce a story around the Bay Area right now. And it has a really different take that's hyper local, like block by block, thinking with and working with organizers and cultural workers and all kinds of people. So it's, that there's nothing else like it that I know of.
Thank you.
Major, how do you think about teaching the next generations? I mean, you've been doing it for a long time. You had people out to Gigi's. You've been working with, before COVID, when you were going to the different spaces, you went to Virginia Beach and went to some different places to think about how to build community specifically with other Black trans women. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it becomes a thing of dealing with each person's needs separately. Don't view them as a group or whole. And you show that you care and that what they believe in matters. Because if it doesn't matter, why care? And that guys, they'll keep coming back to you. They'll let you know of their progress and stuff like that. And then you can accumulate different theories, different aspects of how you can fight this, and then you have a weapon to use against them to make it better.
That's right.
Yeah, that resonates a lot. That sounds a lot. They're asking also about like sort of insurgent knowledge sharing practices, both within the neoliberal university and also outside the institution. I think the example of the podcast is a good one. The zines are a good one. You mentioned right now, Eric, putting up flyers also, and sort of that kind of creating of spaces. And I think the ethical, how should I say it, like holding structure that Ms. Major just shared of caring for the other person and of looking for the individuals and the personal needs, and of showing that those needs and that person matters. I think that actually is something deeply, deeply insurgent and deeply, deeply like radical. Organizing for each other as opposed to organizing for a political ideal, I think is very, very powerful. So I thank you for that share. I don't know if there are any more questions around.
Actually, within the UC system, there have been, some. Well, there have been some stats that have been a little off. There has been not a lot of great retention around POC professors, and something as simple as sending requests for an interview about a topic like, why can't you retain black professors at this institution, can really cause a furor at the local comms office of your local university. I recommend anyone can be a journalist these days. Anyone can apply for a press pass. Just find the email address for the comms office at your institution. Send them an email. Give them a little scare. Let them know that people are watching. People are wondering why they can't, for example, retain POC professors.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like one of the things that probably links Major and Toshio might work together in examples like that of, of course, again, going back to the enormity of the system and the necessity for us to think about like insurgent or guerrilla tactics around how we're going to attack these structures when they're so large and we actually don't have, we're not going to outgun them, right? And so what other means of resistance or revolt do we have at our disposal? And I think that specifically in trans and queer organizing, like we have always, not known the means of political reproduction or whatever you might want to call it. And so, what can we do and what have we always done? And for me, thinking historically is always really important, right? So like in our organizing class, we would read like, The Weapon of Theory, like Cabral with Miss Major, right? And so we would always like bring these different historical moments together to think about their specificity, but also like how they're recursive, how we're always going backwards, and like what does history have to teach us? Because there's so much amazing, of course we've let go of the idea of the telos of history and progress and all that stuff. And so if we do that, then we know that there's so much already here, right here, right now. And so the question of futurity is important, but also the question of present and past are equally important because they are hopefully the things that are going to guide us in a different direction. So I think that that's so important. So that's why, all of us have been working with very limited resources, and I think we've actually had a really had a big impact, and that speaks to the fragility of their entire world.
Toshio.
Yep.
I can't bid to lose power on this thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you for being here, Major.
Yeah.
I'll call you later. Thank you, Muriel, too.
Thanks, Major. Amiro.
okay, so much resolve.
All right.
Okay.
Bye,
All right,
Major.
we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great.
Yeah. So nice. Getting to spend some relatively real life time with Major.
Great. Well, I don't know if we have any more questions. Thank you,
No,
Eric.
there's one
Thank
over
you,
there.
Toshio.
No.
Yeah.
Marion wants to hear, so. Oh, they might. I'll retell it because I don't know if they'll need to hear it
Oh, but they're-
online. Or are they gone?
Oh, right.
Oh, maybe they're gone. Okay.
Online.
We still have viewers online.
Okay. The future. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, for a long time, I've been thinking about zoonotic diseases, right? Which HIV is, which COVID is, which probably every virus of the future will be, which are, you know, in part produced, spread through the ongoingness of capitalist, which is to say colonial relationships, right? Specifically with HIV in Congo, I mean, it's directly related to Belgian colonialism, right? And so, right, and it's hard because then, like, my years with working with, ACT UP kind of AIDS organizing, among the things that it really made me believe deeply was that, of course, health, broadly defined is always, a political issue, and the falling back on the like hyper personalization of public catastrophe is never going to work, right? It didn't work with HIV. It's not going to work with COVID. And so, while we're also trying to keep each other safe and alive and all those things. So it's not that that doesn't matter, but it's like how to do that in the day-to-dayness while also keeping the kind of structural analysis going. So, because, right, what the state wants us to do is to believe that it's all just our personal responsibility. Like, that's what it has done. Not what it wants us to do, it's what it has done very successfully, right? And so keeping that analysis feels so important. And I think what Major was saying about touch and sociality, I mean, all of that was so visceral in the early years of the AIDS pandemic. And of course, like Major also said, HIV AIDS pandemic is not gone, and it has a bunch of new different, it's showing up in a bunch of different new ways now. And so I think, I don't have a lot of answers, but I think in your question is, a similar question around how do we think about sociality. I mean, for myself, online world is like, what little left of a soul I had was gone from that. And so, we try to like have meetings that are masked outside. Like, we're trying to figure out like, what does this mean in this world? How to create like a disability justice framework while also knowing that that looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people, right? Not assuming that this thing is accessible and this thing is not accessible. And so it's created a bunch of new interesting conversations and the horror of it all. But yeah, I mean, I really feel you. I don't know. I mean, we see with our students, right? Like, it's intense. Like, and I feel it too.
Oh, just thank you for that question, and I appreciate the people that are wearing masks, and I'm sorry that we didn't make more time at the beginning to ask. A lot of the book events that we've been doing recently, it's like, that conversation still needs to be had. That was the only thing that I had to add.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back to campus, Eric. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you for being here, Toshio. I know that you've been working together for a long time. So I think I just want to ask a question with the caveat that, sorry, I came to the room late. I was teaching until 12. So if this has been addressed already, please excuse my lack of knowledge. But from where you two are sitting, because you've been doing this organizing work for such a long period of time, now that we're in this kind of post-2020 moment, I think that where we're at Riverside, we've seen, certain new disturbing trends, and in some ways they are a repeat of what we've seen in the past. In some ways they seem to be new. In terms of, let's say, queer and LGBT politics, we have now, for the first time, a black gay dean, And I do see particular ways in which those people who actually have been trained, like POC who have been trained in ethnic studies knowledges, are now using those knowledges and weaponizing their identity and, you know, relative proximity even to movements, to police, and to basically counter any kind of insurgency that was happening. And so I'm just wondering, you know, since you're based in the Bay, there's such a concentration of these politics happening, you know, in the Bay. We've seen it with even the recent district attorney recall, so many levels of things. But I was just wondering if there's anything about this particular historical moment and its politics that you think that we can be smarter about as we're trying to organize in somewhat new conditions. Because there seems to be some things, you know, whether it's like the proliferation of people taking up abolition as the new buzzword, and then people using the people using that appropriation against the actual abolition of the police. And we have that, I feel like that's the moment we're kind of in right now. And so, yeah, so I was just wondering if you had some insights on that kind of condition that we're trying to struggle through. And that's it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, no, that co-optation of our movements by these power structures is something that is, you know, it's not new. And like you said, there's like new ways of like innovating, you know, kind of the tools that these different groups use, like the police, you know, in San Francisco wanting to start using like robot dogs, which I think maybe in LA they are going to go ahead and fund that. It's not, they're innovative in some ways, but it is the same story that has been happening, which is, it's helpful to have these perspectives of people like Major who have been in the fight for so long for trans queer liberation to tell us that these are things she's seen before, that even if superficially they may look like new and potentially promising ways out of the trouble that we're in, you have to be careful because the states, like the corporations, like people who are interested in sort of co-opting our movements are watching, and they are good at what they do. But yeah, in San Francisco, certainly it's kind of the, I would say it's like an incubator for these neoliberal inventions. Our mayor, for example, is the first black woman mayor that we have in San Francisco. But the story that Eric was telling earlier about Banko Brown, who is the trans man who was shot outside of Walgreens a couple weeks back, as soon as that happened and popped off, she got on a plane to Israel to hang out with a bunch of Zionists, and you know, left Banko Brown behind her, or tried to. Likewise, there's like one of the most neoliberal politicians, Scott Wiener, is from the Castro. He's this gay guy who always falls back on the fact that he's gay and identifies as gay as like kind of his excuse for pulling all of these other tricks. So yeah, it is something that we just have to keep an eye on. But it is not new, I think. And we have ways of combating it. We just have to. It means that we have to keep changing our approaches and trying new things.
Does this one work? Yeah, okay. So, for example, London Bree grew up in public housing, and she's probably on the forefront of destroying what little public housing remains. We have a new white gay man who was just elected, who identifies as a recovering drug user who is waging the war on drugs, right? It's not like it's so lined up, it almost looks like some sort of nightmare comic book that I drew. You know, it's just on, you go down every single person, right? And it's like the orchestration of multicultural fascism is unbelievable. I mean, it's just like every time something new happens, you're like, oh my God, right? We had a anti-critical race theory school board recall that was all organized by people of color. That replaced them all with people of color. I mean, it's so, you know, it's so wild. The three most, it's hard, but I would say the three most conservative people on the supervisors are three gay people, right? It just keeps going on and on and on and on. You know, we had a black trans woman that was running for supervisor on a Tough on Crime, we need more police ticket. You know, she's 14th runner-up on RuPaul's Drag Race. And so, you know, it just keeps going. You know, it's like whatever nightmare you can imagine, the world is always going to be worse than that. And it will be from the Bay Area. It's wild. I mean, it's wild. This just keeps going on and on. Okay, Dylan. Oh, Donna. Go, Donna.
Thanks so much. So I'm obsessed with Eric talking about rage, revenge, friendship, and cake driving their work. Their critique of the AIDS quilt as comforting. I hadn't thought about that before. And your work with gay shame. And I'm interested in Toshio talking about Sad Francisco. So could you talk more about how does affect drive your work? And then how can we use affect to mobilize others with us?
So the podcast is just an extension of the media work that I've done in the past. It's just been it's been refreshing for me, like personally, to try a new medium. But then also, I think because you know, I feel like I'm whining and you know, kind of like I guess an old person like wishing for days of yore, but the you know, local news has kind of imploded since I started doing journalism 20 years back, and it is pretty hard to make a living as a journalist. So you have to try different ways of doing that. And the podcast is it is my way of doing some local news. I try to bring in stories that are because most of the San Francisco stories, like in a lot of cases, we are this incubator for these neoliberal ideas that end up getting exported to other cities and other places, and so it's kind of through that lens of like what's the latest invention that the state can throw at us to try and derail our movements. And in San Francisco, yeah, there tends to be a lot of creative ways that they are trying to do that. So it's an attempt to expose some of those ways.
Yeah, emotion. Well, I'm a triple cancer, so there's no way out of it. You know, I mean, I guess I've for a long time thought about like the political uses and non-uses of, you know, both emotions and humor, and the ways that those go together. I mean, I think that for us organizing, probably the first order of organizing is that it has to be entertaining to us. What it does in the world, we can't control. What it does for us, we can't control. And so sometimes it's radically incoherent, but, you know, YOLO. And like, so, you know, I think that that's important. It has to be entertaining. It has to be funny. It has to like be I think that we're also always really invested in figuring out what the edge of like the conversation is, and then like going really far beyond that. That being said, our politics, you know, like what we want of the world is pretty, you know, we always bring it back to like the demands of like housing, healthcare, food, you know, those kinds of things. And I think that that becomes undeniable, but then like how we're going to get there is so contested. And so, you know, making funny flyers, making funny sayings feels really important to us, because I think going back to the earlier conversation around self-care, or how do you persevere, or whatever it is, like we mostly just like laugh, you know, and the thing has to be like somewhat hilarious, or we don't really want to do it. And we work in different valences, but I think that feels really important. I've been thinking a lot about this. I was thinking about maybe writing a paper about revenge. I mean, I'm always interested in like what emotions you're not allowed to have, right? Like I wrote a paper a little while ago about hate, and now I'm like, oh, now we're on to revenge. And so I'm so interested in like, why is that like not a proper radical emotion, or like, you know, I don't know. There's a whole lot there, and people theorize this is not like a novel concept, but I'm really interested in it. I'm like, why not? You know, revenge is a way that you show collective care. You know, destroying that which destroys you is a way that you spread love. Yeah, so I'm just, you know, I'm, yeah. And whenever I say that, people are like, and I'm like, oh, sounds okay to me. But you know, so I'm just interested in sitting with it, right? That we're kind of produced to have the kind of positive affects around social change, like, you know, chase love, you know, like all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, why is it there? Like, why can we not think beyond or against that? And what is over there, right? Maybe that's where freedom lives. I don't know. Because it isn't here. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, I don't know, how much more time do we have?
Okay,
Time.
Dylan, you can come ask me. Come ask me.
Yeah. For the people here, like we will have the meet and greet at room 11111, the round room. And thank you once again to Eric and to Toshio for sharing with us. Thank you also to Ms. Major,
Yes.
listening to us in the virtual world. And thank you all for being here.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.